It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. I am so glad you could join us today. I think this is show 296. We're still in February, but it's getting late in February in 2019, and we have an awful lot of stuff coming up today. A little later on, we are going to have an interview with Daniel O'Brien, who is an ex-Jehovah's Witness. So we're going to get some insights of what it's like to be in Jehovah's Witness and on the unfortunate side effects of what may happen to you and your personal life if you dare to leave. And we're going to talk to him about that. For the Investing Skeptically segment, we are going to talk about something I touched on probably a year and a half ago, but it's been a while, and I've mentioned it to a few clients and or prospective clients recently, and I thought, I haven't really gone over this in a show for a while, so we're going to do this again, and it is about the performance of stocks in the long run and how, and this is the part that's staggering, 4% of stocks account for the vast majority of the stock market return. And so I'm going to go into the details for the Investing Skeptically segment and even have a bonus Investing Skeptically segment happened across another super shitty fund. So I'll walk you through that a little later on. But before we get to that, I want to talk about cars. Now, cars are not my area of expertise. I've long shown that I don't have an eye for a good-looking car, a sporty car, because I've now bought 5 different Priuses, and a Toyota Sienna minivan. That's pretty much the only cars I've bought in the last 15, give or take, years. And our really old Priuses, the 5 and the 6 that our kids were driving, were dying. So we did some car maneuvering, and I bought a used car, 2007 Prius, for our daughter, and it developed problems right away. And the place we bought it from honored the warranty, because it's one of those things when you buy a used car, I'm terrified that something's going to go wrong major right after I buy it. And something did go wrong, pretty significant. But this place, and it's called Lazy Chimp. Lazy Chimp, they have, a lot, a place where you can go look at cars and test drive them in Downers Grove, which is near West Chicago suburb, or I guess not too near West, but West Chicago suburb. And they honored their warranty, and to the best of my knowledge, they've spent over $1,000. And the biggest problem was this thing called the inverter-converter. I'm not really sure, but it handles the ginormous power that comes from the major battery pack and converts it down to a lower level of power. See, I'm a real electronics expert here. That powers things like your headlights and your dash and your turn signals. And it was faulty. So it's a very expensive piece of the car, and they replaced it and did all the work, and I paid nothing. So kudos to Lazy Chimp. Not getting paid to promote them, but I will be happy to promote them because they treated us right. They had fair prices to start with. And anyway, so that's my used car experience. But because we lost 2 cars, I needed another car to replace our family of cars. And I've already talked a little bit about what I was looking for in some past shows, so I don't want to go over that too much. But the quick update is I decided to go with the Chevy Bolt with a B. It's a very unfortunate nomenclature that they had the Volt with the V and then the Bolt with the B. And often people at Chevy will call it the Bolt EV just to make sure you know which car you're talking about. So that was the end result of my decision. And now I'm going to go over some of the thought processes that went in it, maybe things that I haven't discussed previously, maybe some that I have. And if this part is going to bore the shit out of you, just skip forward a couple minutes. But this is kind of how my thinking went. So I started looking at the Volt with the V. I'll just call it the V car, and found out they were going to cease production and they're no longer going to make those. And that concerned me some. Plus, it did have 50 miles of range on electricity, and it's that electric range that I'm really, really desirous of, because the Prius Prime that we already own gets about 25 miles on electric, and I love it. The problem with the Prius Prime is once you get past the 25 miles of electric, it's a low-powered, high-efficiency car, and it's very easy to notice the difference going from electric mode to four-cylinder 1.5-liter engine. But, it does get 54 miles per gallon after you end electric mode. And one of the driving factors for me in my life is efficiency. I think efficiency is important, and it's something companies and individuals should spend more effort seeking out. But anyway, I kind of do that with investments. So I was looking for a replacement car, and one of the things I had said was, if I could just get a Prius Prime that got twice as many miles on electric, I'd be willing to pay more, maybe $5,000 or $6,000 extra if they just put a bigger battery in there. But that car isn't available. So I started looking around, and the Volt came up as an option, and it's a very nice car. And of course, Teslas came up as options, also very nice cars. And I did receive so many emails from owners of Teslas and Bolts and Volts and some Nissan Leafs and a couple other cars. Quite honestly, surprised how many people took the time and made the effort to write me an email. So everyone that did that, thank you. Thank you very much. It was all very educational and very helpful in getting to my decision. But some of the reasons I didn't go with a Tesla, first of all, the look doesn't do it for me. I know that's probably the weirdest thing for Tesla owners to think, because they're going to look at the Bolt and they're going to look at a Tesla and go, "Are you freaking kidding me?" Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just not my thing. Some of us like different things, and sometimes that's just how the world works. Sport cars don't do it for me, because part of the problem in my head, it kind of shouts excess, that it's too much and it's trying too hard to look sexy, and maybe it should try harder to be more efficient. I understand that a Tesla is incredibly efficient, and they were the first really good high-end quality cars that were all electric. I appreciate that, and they have made a difference in the world, I think, in pushing forward this technology. So I cannot deny that. One of the things that I did find annoying is that I would get emails and I would read online and read reviews about the $35,000 Tesla. The $35,000 Tesla at this point in time is a unicorn. It does not exist. I don't know that it's going to exist. One of the articles I read, Tesla has said, or Elon Musk, who is Tesla, has said it'll be at least 6 months, which in Tesla times mean at least 12 months before they start putting out the $35,000 version. And one of the rationales, which is a really good rationale, you make less money on a more affordable car than you make on a luxury car. And boy, does Tesla need to make some money, because they got a lot of debt. So that makes perfect sense. And as long as you can keep selling expensive cars, why sell cars you can't make as much money on unless you can make the production? And they've had some production issues. They are now making a lot of cars, but the trade-off may be that with higher production comes lower quality, and Consumer Reports recently delisted or removed the Tesla Model 3 from their recommended car list. I don't even know if the Chevy Bolt is on the recommended car list. I looked. I haven't been able to find that, but I did find a review where Consumer Reports said the Chevy Bolt is surprisingly good. So I take that as pretty high praise, because I wouldn't have had that expectation for a Chevy, and apparently neither did Consumer Reports. But back to the Tesla. I'd often see this the price of $42,900 or $43,000. The $35,000 is not even an option. And even the $42,000 price I could not figure out for a while where that price comes from. And I finally figured it out. So the $35,000 car is not available. The $45,000 car is available to order, and it would come in a couple of months. And it has a bigger battery pack than the $35,000 model would have. So it has a bigger battery pack. It's $45,000. But that model isn't available either. Oh, well, I mean, that model is, but you can only buy the $45,000 model with the premium interior, which includes leather seats and a couple other features, and it adds $5,000 to the car. So basically right now, the cheapest Tesla you can get is $50,000. Is it worth $50,000? Obviously, a lot of people think that it is. Not saying it's not saying it's not an amazing car, but you're not going to buy it for $42,000. It's going to be $50,000. And how they get to $42,000 is they subtract $3,750, which is the tax credit that you get for buying a Tesla. The Bolt, I'm allowed to get a $7,500 tax credit because of the stupid way the government has set up this rebate program or this tax credit program. And once you sell a certain number of cars, which Tesla has, it falls by half. And then I think it's 6 months later, it falls by half again. So if you're seriously eyeing a Tesla, the $3,750 goes away, I think, in 6 months, or at least it falls in half, and then it's going to be under $2,000. The other thing on the Tesla website that they list in calculating the price is $4,300 that you're going to save in fuel over 5 years, which, okay, that's true. No argument with that. Maybe even that's a conservative number. But that doesn't reduce the price of the car. That reduces the ongoing operating expenses of the car. And at best, I think that's disingenuous. And I'm very surprised that so many websites and journal articles would cite this price of $42,000 or $43,000 as being the price of a Tesla. If you're going to include the tax credit, okay, maybe I can see it with that, but you should have a note. But you can't include future savings from fuel because that does not reduce the purchase price of the vehicle. You can fight me over it if you want, but that's the thing. I also had emails where people have Teslas that are semi-autonomous driving vehicles, which is really cool. Keep in mind, that's an additional $5,000 up front. If you want to add that to your car later, it's $7,000. So to get that, you're starting at a minimum of $55,000. Also, if you want a color other than black, you have to pay at least $1,000 for a different color, and the red is $2,500 more. So there's extras that can really bump up the price pretty quickly. Another thing that's weird about electric cars, and Tesla knows this, they're very expensive to make. And I found reports that would say that General Motors, Chevy, is losing anywhere from $5,000 to $9,000 per unit that they sell. So they're getting the expertise and the experience of making these cars. They find out what doesn't work and they can fix it, which is one of the reasons I would have not bought the first model year of 2017. I'm getting the third model year, which actually has some revisions from 18. But the car is not sexy looking to the average person. Again, me being different, I think it's fantastic. But that hurts demand, and they have not been able to create the whiz-bang promotional excitement that Tesla has. Tesla has killed that. Maybe too much excitement in Tesla's another topic. But Chevy, they just can't sell the cars fast enough. They've had to delay production for a while. And because of that, Chevy has some extra inducements to sell some of them. And so I was able to get almost $5,000 off the list price. Now, you can get a Bolt starting as low as $37,000. And if you're a real diehard and just want the electric and no other features, you can do that. However, I like some of the features like lane assist and the cruise control assist where it automatically slows down your car. When you're driving at a reasonably slow speed, it can detect pedestrians. It has backup cameras. It has a camera in the back of the car that then shows up in your rearview mirror. Your rearview mirror is not only a mirror, but a monitor, a screen. So even if the back of your car is full or there's people back there, your view of what's behind you is not obstructed. That's kind of cool. I don't think they have that on Tesla, although it'd be very easy to add. So it has a lot of technology too, but of course, like with the Tesla, if you want those extra technologies in the Bolt EV, you have to pay for it. So the model I ended up going with has a lot of extra features. So to be fair, it's about a $44,000 car versus the $50,000 car with the Tesla. They both do quite well with electricity. And again, I'll grant Tesla the win on this. It's got the better network built in and it charges faster. So if I was going to regularly drive across the Midwest or across the entire country, that might be a deal breaker for me and I would have gotten the Tesla. But I have another car I can do that with, and I don't do that often. I need something that can go all the way around Chicago. I need something that can go from the Chicago suburbs to Champaign and possibly back. I'm going to test that later without having to figure out where to charge. But knowing that I can charge, and there are more and more places being built every day, so that problem will be going away. The other perks with the Bolt, at least for me, is I do get the full $7,500 tax credit. And this is unique to me and won't apply to almost any of you. For a long time, I've had a GM credit card, and that credit card had almost $4,000 of earnings that I could use to apply to a new General Motors car. So I got another $4,000 off the price that only applies to GM cars and someone who has a GM credit card. So the end result is that the Bolt is costing me, or did cost me, because I got it already. It's in my garage, topping off with electricity. The Bolt cost me about $19,000 less than the cheapest possible Tesla I could buy. So people will say it's nice to have a sexy looking car, and they're right. I think is sexy is $19,000. That's a whole lot of money. So that $19,000 that I'm not spending on the car, I can buy almost a whole nother car. Not a Bolt or a Tesla, but it's a lot of money. So that's kind of some of the things that I've been thinking about and working on. But yes, I now have a Chevy Bolt EV, and I do have some experience with the electric driving because of the Prius Prime that we had, but there's a steep learning curve. And I've researched the crap out of these cars and watched way too many YouTube videos and read too many blogs. I even found a technical video vlog, I guess, technical vlog with a company involved in tearing down cars and calculating how much they cost. And so, just a lot of information that I've done, and that's my decision. It doesn't mean the Tesla is awful. It's a fantastic car. I have some concerns with Tesla and the car. I have some concerns with GM, Chevrolet, and the Bolt. But in the end, for me, the Bolt was the better decision. So anyway, the show is going to be way too long already. We're going to take a quick break and get into the investing skeptically stuff. Today's investing skeptically topic is titled, Do Stocks Outperform Treasury Bills? And I'm going to do some quotes and pull some information from a research journal article by the same name, Do Stocks Outperform Treasury Bills? And it's by Hendrik Bessembinder. And I have contacted him and asked him to come on the show. Apparently he's not the biggest fan of interviews, and he's much more in favor of being able to write things down. So I didn't really want to write up questions and have him answer them and me read the questions and then the answers. So I'm going to try my best to explain on a basic level what this research shows, because it gets very, very complicated very quickly with mathematics and statistics that easily get out of my ability to comprehend. and I'm assuming the vast majority of listeners aren't going to get it either, and I'm not sure that it's practical for our purposes to go that down deep into the rabbit hole. So what we're going to look at, first of all, we need to understand Treasury bills. These are short-term bonds issued by the United States government. And so one of the fundamental parts of this research is each and every month, one can see how much money U.S. Treasury bills have made in a given month. That's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to find. It's pretty easy to research, yada, yada, yada. Now, we also know from a lot of data that stocks beat Treasury bills. Piece of cake. That's easy. But which stocks? So what he did that's a little different is he took every single stock and looked at how well it did every single month and compared each stock's monthly performance to the monthly performance of Treasury bills to see how well they did. And a couple other things to know is that this is data pulled, the stock data is pulled from the Center for Research in Securities Prices database. This is generally accepted in the academic community, and I think in the greater financial community as a whole, as the ultimate database of stock prices. And it includes every single publicly traded common stock listed on the New York Stock Exchange, the Amex, and the NASDAQ, and maybe some others, but it definitely includes all of those from 1926, and in this case, because the study is a little bit over a year old, to the end of 2016. This information is not publicly available to you and I because a company has spent a lot of time and effort to get it together. So if you want to look at this, you have to pay a big fee to access this data and to be able to use it to do research, which is the cool thing about research is they already pulled the data and did all of the work. You just have to read what they typed up. And again, if you want to find this on Google, you can easily do it. If you can't find it, let me know. I'll send you the PDF. It's Do Stocks Outperform Treasury Bills? And the main author is Hendrik Bessembinder. So you take all these individual stocks and you look at how they perform month to month to month. One of the things that he did was he averaged, or he took all the returns of all the stocks and figured out to the nearest 5% how each stock has done over time. Now, it's a kind of fun trick question, but guess what the most common return to the nearest 5% of all stocks is? I'll give you a second. What is the most common total return? Is it minus 15, minus 20, plus 20, plus 50, plus 120? What's the most common return? The most common return is minus 100%. Now, that's a little bit of a trick because no other number has a higher frequency of occurrence than minus 100%. You can't go below minus 100%, so it's a stop on the floor. But the funny thing is when you look at every single stock listed in these exchanges, their average time listed, the average time the stock exists, and again, I'll let you guess if you want to play along, how long is the average company listed publicly? The answer is 7.5 years. 7.5 years. Now, part of that is because we end the data set. So a company that started in 2012 might only show 4 years of data because this current data set that he used ended in 2016. So that would be a 4-year occurrence. But many companies go bankrupt. And it doesn't matter if you buy the stock when it is initially publicly offered at, let's say, $20 a share. It doesn't matter if you buy it later at $40 a share. It doesn't matter if you try to, what I call, catch the falling knife when the stock falls to $1 and you buy it at $1. It doesn't matter if you pay $20, $40, or $1 for the stock. When it goes to zero, you lose 100% of your investment. Maybe you bought more shares at $1 than you could have bought at $40, but your total loss is the same minus 100%. This is the risk of buying individual stocks. A lot of companies do not succeed. The amazing thing that he found out by doing this research is that most companies, and by most I mean more than 50%, do not even return what Treasury bills return. So more than half of all stocks do not return, when measured month to month and then stacked up over time, do not return what Treasury bills return. Treasury bills today are very low returns of maybe 2% a year. In the past, they've been higher, 4, 5, maybe even 6% for over a year's time period. So it's a higher hurdle than it might seem like today. But if you can't make more than really safe and secure Treasury bills, why would you invest in stocks at all? So a lot of stocks go to zero. A lot of stocks lose money. A lot of stocks make money but don't make as much as Treasury bills. And you get up to something like 56, 58% of all stocks make Treasury bill returns or less. Now, 42% of stocks do outperform Treasury bills. So that's nice. Most of them by a very small amount. A few of them are bigger returns. And the ones that you want to own, and of course, we can look back and see them through time. How do you know in advance which ones they are? So the ones that really do the big returns works out to a situation where the total stock market return above what you could get with Treasury bills is accounted for by only 4% of all publicly traded stocks. 4% of stocks account for the 100% of the return above what you could get in ultra-conservative, ultra-safe Treasury bills. 4% of stocks. This is one of the reasons why a managed portfolio, or in your case, if you go out and buy 5 or 10 or 20 stocks, odds are you are going to underperform the market and you might not even match the returns of buying really boring but really safe Treasury bills because you don't happen to pick one or two of the winning stocks. Again, it's easy to see them going back in time. Now, I also have a weird selection bias for people that come to me. I have a lot of people that come to me that have made a lot of money in the last 5 or 10 years. And often they are people who happen to, 5 or 10 years ago, buy stocks in things like Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, the stocks that have had huge returns in the last few years. People that have picked stocks that did shitty or went to zero don't contact to hire me because they don't have any money or they don't have much money. The people who got lucky in these handful of stocks have made a lot of money and often come to me. And one of my first suggestions is they need to diversify. Yay, they got really lucky. They put a good chunk of their portfolio in a handful of stocks and they won. They beat the odds. Are you going to beat the odds again? Maybe. Are you going to beat the odds again with those same handful of stocks? Wow. That seems really unlikely to me, given the fact that 4% of stocks are the biggest winners, and it's not always the same stocks over time. Again, referring to this database, it is so selective on which companies make the bulk of the returns that, again, from 1926 to 2016, 5 companies, only 5 companies account for 10% of the total wealth creation of the stock market. 5 companies. 90 companies, which are still less than 1% of all companies ever listed, account for 50% of the wealth creation. And so this is staggering. And 1,000, when you finally get to 1,092 companies, they create 100% of the gain above bonds. So you might ask yourself, what in the hell are these 5 companies? ExxonMobil, Apple, Microsoft, General Electric, and International Business Machines, or IBM. So as a bad example of what could happen by looking at this long-term performance data, you might have said, wow, if GE is one of the 5 biggest winners, I should own that. And a couple of years ago, you would have bought it for almost $30 a share, and today it is $10 a share. So you could have lost 2/3 of your investment, even though this company over the long run has been one of the single biggest winners, because sometimes the single biggest winners don't continue to be the biggest winners going forward. The paper also examines what happens on certain days, because sometimes there's certain days, like earlier this year in 2019, there was a day where the stock market went up 5% in one day. And so it looks into the ability, or maybe what you can gain or miss by missing the big drops and missing the big gains. And it shows that a lot of the days, the markets just muddle along. But there's a few days every year where the stock market does really well. And there's also a few days every year where the stock market does really poorly. So that's one of the reasons market timing has a really hard time of succeeding, because if you're jumping in and out of the market, most days it doesn't matter what you're doing, at least from a whole market perspective. But a few days can be the biggest winners, and if you miss those few days, you can miss the vast majority of the entire year's returns by missing a handful of days. So market timing doesn't work, and picking a handful of stocks, especially if you're doing it kind of randomly. Now, you might think that you're really picking good stocks and you know what you're doing. Maybe you do, but I'm betting you don't. Now, some listeners have those skill sets, but most of us don't. I sure as hell don't. I don't know how to pick a really good stock. And one of the biggest advantages that I've ever achieved in my life, one of the best things in my personal portfolio, is acknowledging I don't know what in the fuck I'm doing when it comes to picking an individual company. There are very, very few people that you can point to that have picked winning stocks year after year after year after year. The most common one people will point to for me is Warren Buffett. Well, yes and no. In the beginning, yes, Warren Buffett did. But after that, he didn't. And I'm not saying he didn't pick winners. He did, but he made them winners because he bought large enough chunks of really big companies to take them over and improve them and fix them. Or he saw that they had a potential far greater than the current management team or the board of directors could see. So he's a visionary and would buy stock in companies that he could then have the ability to control, at least in part, if not all, and change the way they do business to maximize the value of that company. So again, that's something most of my listeners aren't going to be able to do. If that's something you think you can do, let me know, because you should definitely hire me. But most of us, we're never going to be able to squirrel together enough money or borrow enough money or get enough people to trust us to go buy a life insurance company or an auto insurance company or actual pipelines and invest in them. It's just something we're not going to do. And picking a handful of stocks probably is not going to work. That's why I have a lot of people tell me, and the data matches this over long periods of time, picking a handful of stocks, odds are you're going to underperform the market. And that's even before we get into the problems of you accidentally buying high when a stock is exciting and selling low when you're scared. And one example, maybe Apple recently became a $1 trillion company, and its stock peaked out at around 220 and then very quickly dropped to 150, and now it's bounced back a little bit to 170. I don't have a position on what it's going to do in the future, but if you were buying it because everyone else was buying it, if you were excited and you just thought Apple could never end and it was going to keep doing what it's done for the last 10, 20 years, which has been truly amazing. If you bought it 10 years ago, let's take a look at this. 10 years ago, it was about $12 a share. So even at 150, you made a lot of money. But if you've bought it in the last year or so, you could have lost money. So it can be hard. And will it make money again going forward? Will the stock go higher? Maybe, maybe not. Will it go up 10-fold or 20-fold like it's done over the last decade or two? I'm willing to say that's unlikely. It might happen. And you know what? 10 years from now, you can remind me and tell me I was wrong if it goes up 10 or 20 times. But again, stocks don't generally do that. Companies that have huge returns cannot have huge returns forever because at some point they would be larger than every other company. They would be larger than the U.S. economy. So really, really, really big companies have a hard time growing at really high rates. So they're probably not going to be the biggest winners. But the short of this research, the most important part that I want you to take away is that the vast majority of the returns, 4% of stocks, account for 100% of the returns that are above the kind of considered risk-free rate of return from U.S. Treasury bills. So you have to get the stocks. And how do you get those stocks? You buy everything. And that's what we try to do with index funds. You can, if you have only a few $1,000s, you can get the total stock market index from Vanguard or with next to nothing. $5, you open up an account and you can do it at Fidelity. The minimum there is now $0. Vanguard, it's $3,000, but at Fidelity for that specific fund, the starting amount is $0. You can link it to your bank and send $5 or $10 or $20 a month. Do not use one of the new modern fancy schmancy apps that looks all pretty on your phone and is easy to get from the App Store. That's great. Why do that when you can do all of that stuff at Fidelity? It might not be as pretty. It might not be as trendy and you're not seeing it pop up in your feed on Facebook, but you can go easily set up an account. Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, many other companies. You can link it to your bank and you can send $5 or $10 or $20 a week or month. The big problem, of course, and I've talked about this many times, you're never going to get the retirement saving $5 or $20 a month. You've got to save serious money. My general advice is 20% of your gross income. So we're going to wrap up here. This was do stocks outperform Treasury bills, and hopefully that helped you have a good perspective on how stocks work and how money is made. I've got a quick little bonus investing skeptically segment. I've mentioned before I get a lot of emails about everything to do with investing because I have a business and I have clients and these companies find me. I don't know how they do it, but I get lots and lots of email about different kinds of things. And most of it just gets thrown away really quickly and I never even read it. But every once in a while, something catches my eye. And this happened to catch my eye because I just talked about this type of stuff that I'm getting now. And it's a little different than emails or sales pitches, I guess, I would get a few months ago because the fourth quarter of 2018, the market had a really big drop, 15, 18, 20%, somewhere in that ballpark. And that's following mostly up year. So the total return for the year, -4, -6%, something like that. But a big drop scares people. So the new pitch that I've been getting, and like I said, I've mentioned this, is low volatility. And so I just happened to get this email, and it struck me because I had made that comment recently. And so I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to dig into this one a little bit and see what makes it tick. And for your reference, this is the symbol is S as in Sam, V as in Victor, A as in Apple, R as in Robert, X as in xylophone, SVARX. It's the Spectrum Low Volatility Fund. So again, it's low volatility. So I went to Morningstar.com. Really easy. Any of you can do it. Just Morningstar.com. You might get a few on-screen ads if you don't have a good ad blocker. You can put in the symbol for this mutual fund and learn all kinds of things about it in a very short period of time. And this is now going to fit into my category of a super shitty fund. I've had this every once in a while. Sometimes I see clients with super shitty funds or new clients coming in from somewhere else. And this is indeed a super shitty fund. So let's go over some of the details I found on Morningstar. First of all, the annual expense ratio of stock mutual funds is often cited as being around 1.5%. There's a lot of really good low-cost index funds that are 0.2, 0.1, 0.05. You can really tweak down these expenses, and Fidelity, of course, recently announced a couple of zero expense ratio funds, and we've already done a segment on that, so I'm not going to get into that. But 1.5 is average for stock funds, and bond funds, it's generally a little less because the returns are less, and you would eat up more of the returns. But this fund has a published expense ratio of 3.13. No, it's not 0.3. It's 3.13. 3% a year is going to this mutual fund. And so it's really easy to figure out where they got the money to make marketing materials and send it out and try to promote it to people like me who might go, hey, it's titled a low volatility fund. That might appeal to some of my clients that are in a little bit of a shock of the big drop in the fourth quarter of 18 and, of course, the best January in the last 15 years. That is volatility. You had a big drop and you had a big bounce up. The net effect is not much change in the last 5 or 6 months, but it is a lot of volatility. So one of the ways you could reduce volatility is have a whole bunch of cash under your mattress because it's worth $1. It's worth $1 in the future. That's low volatility. You can also go with buying things that go up and down different than the U.S. stock market, like a really high quality real estate index. Bonds will do the same thing. International funds, which might be more volatile than the U.S. stock market, but sometimes go up and down at different times. Anyway, I digress. But this fund also has a turnover, which tells you how fast things within the fund are bought and sold in an average year. A 100% turnover means that it basically sold everything that it has and bought a replacement within 1 year. 100% is a little bit below the average for U.S. stock managed funds. Index funds sometimes have a turnover ratio of 4, 5, 7%. Short-term bond funds will have a much higher turnover rate because if you're owning 1 or 2 year bonds, in 1 or 2 years, they all expire and pay out. So you have to replace them. So the turnover by definition will be higher. This fund has a 438% turnover, which means whatever they bought a month or two ago, they're selling it already. So they're buying and selling. They think something's going to change. They're jumping around. Whatever it is they're doing inside is going to change and constantly change on a regular basis. So the fund has given themselves the leeway to do just about anything at any time. And of course, that'll all be defined in the prospectus, but you have to read all that to understand what it's going to do. A couple other interesting facts. As of today, and we're in February of 2019, when I pulled this up again on Morningstar.com, currently 67% of the money is in cash. So you would expect to have low volatility if 67% of your fund is in cash. So whatever it is they did before or might do next, right now, 2/3 of the portfolio is in cash, and the 1 year return is 3%. Okay, now, if the 1 year return is 3% and they have a 3% expense ratio, that means somehow they made 6. So they're taking some kind of risk. And of course, a little quick look at their webpage talks about using derivatives and credit swaps, and they buy on margin. They also will short bonds or buy bonds long, all kinds of things. All of these can be very risky things to do. And for what benefit? The benefit is to create a low volatility fund, assuming that you're buying into the name of the fund. The email also bragged to me about how it's a 5-star fund in its category. Yay, I don't care. That just means it did something compared to its peers that Morningstar gave it 5 stars. The 5-star rating system is meaningless at best. it is dangerous because you think if it hits a 4 or 5 star that it's a safer place to go. That may or may not be true, but it's not because of the star rating. So I looked at the individual annual returns for this fund over the last 5 years because it's only been around for 5 years. And when I say only, a lot of the index funds that I use, particularly at Vanguard, have been around 10, 15, 20, 30 funds. I mean, the S&P 500 fund was created, I think, in 1974, 75. But they have a track record that's longer. I like that. It's not necessarily a requirement for me to invest in a mutual fund, but it's nice. So year by year, in 2014, this fund made 2.4%. In 2015, made 1%, which, okay, nice, slow, small returns that one would expect in a low volatility fund. In 2016, it made 16.4% in bonds. Wow, 16%. 2017, it made 8%. And 2018 calendar year, it lost 1%. So if you had a truly conservative bond fund, you could have made 1 or 2% instead of losing 1. But the funny thing is, if you make 1 or 2 for a couple of years and then make 16%, and then in 2018 you lose 1%, how do you keep the name a low volatility fund? That's not low volatility. That's stock market like volatility. Not as extreme as the stock market, because the stock market in 16 might have made something over 20%, and then this year lost 5. But this is pretty darn volatile and happens to go up the most when the stock market went up, happened to go down when the stock market went down. So they're jumping all around. They're charging you 3% a year, incredibly fast turnover. And so I would not buy this fund. I would not recommend this fund. If you happen to be somebody that owns it, sell it. And that's our little bonus investing skeptically and a super shitty fund. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship.
And he's right. It is a miracle. Except when you think about it, it's actually not. It's science, which I'd argue is actually better and more convenient than a miracle, because you don't have to spend the next 2,000 years worshipping the scientists. You can just be like, thanks. and what?
All right, everybody, welcome back. Of course, you are still listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. With me today, I have Daniel O'Brien, who is a master's in education and is currently a teacher. Daniel, how are you, sir?
I am well, thank you, Phil. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm looking over this list of accomplishments, and you have your, I guess, is it terminal degree? Is that the way to say that? From Concordia?
Well, terminal so far, but hopefully I'm not done. Not only am I a teacher, but I like to set the example of being a lifelong learner myself.
Oh, I'm so delighted, because that's one of the things I love, and I bore my listeners with the details from time to time, so we'll not do that again. But okay. Concordia sounds to me kind of like a Christian Lutheran-y kind of thing. Is that the case?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about it because that's not why I attended, but I do know it's there are different synods that oversee it, but each university is independent. So Concordia in Irvine, where I attended, it's actually a brick and mortar school. I went there as part of what was a new thing for them in 2013 when I started. I guess it was actually 2012, and that was an online cohort. So it was nice for 2 years. About 20 of us went together through all these different classes, teachers from all over, and we learned a lot about how to be better educators. And I really enjoyed it, learned a lot, and I use it with my students every day.
Excellent. So even though it's a basically religious facility, the education was secular and you just learned how to teach.
Yeah, exactly. There was no religious component at all to the educational portion that I did in the 2 years I was in the master's program.
Well, that's nice. And of course, before that, you were at California State University, Northridge, and you have a degree in music education.
That's correct.
And so you teach music, but you also know some things about psychology and religion and cult kind of stuff?
Well, yeah, and for a lot of different reasons. So I started playing guitar when I was just 7. When I was a teenager, I was in rock and roll bands. When I was in my young 20s, I was actually in a few bands that performed in the LA area. We had some notoriety. I worked as a while as a film composer, scored a few low-budget films, which you would have never heard of, but I had fun doing them.
Good.
Did a lot of work in the 90s for CBS on their on-air promotions. The David Letterman NewsHour, we did some things for that. For Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman was one of the shows that I did some music for the promotions for that show. And then I went back in my 40s, and it's kind of part of the cult experience as a Jehovah's Witness, went back to school after delaying that for a long time. In my early 40s, I went back and I got my degree in music education, worked as a band director at a high school and a middle school and an elementary school. Really loved that. But then when the economy tanked in 2008-9, music programs were getting cut. I knew about the program where I now teach, Oak Park Independent School, because one of my sons had gone here. A position opened up. I took this position, and independent study programs, Phil, they're different everywhere. But where we are, we have about 8 teachers. We have about 240 students. And the students come here because they're athletes, they're actors, maybe they have physical conditions where they just can't be in a traditional comprehensive high school. And so we work one-on-one with them. When I took this position, I was asked, because of some other things in my background, if I would take over the sciences as my specialty. So that's what I do now. I teach chemistry, physics, earth science, biology, and psychology as well. Those are my areas of expertise.
And of course, one of the little nuggets you just dropped in there casually and ran on past it. Jehovah's what? When? How did you get involved in that, and when did that start?
Right. So in my early 20s, I was very passionate about music. I went to a music school. I went to school, a community college that had, frankly, a pretty crappy music program. I won't mention it. But I wanted to learn more, so I started studying things on my own. And frankly, you can't really understand music from the Baroque or the classical or Romantic eras without knowing what was going on politically, socially. And, of course, the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church, those were the big things in Europe through all those time periods. And I'm kind of the guy, even before there's the internet, I would get caught down rabbit holes. And I got very interested in how religion was such a dominant, powerful political and social force in Europe for almost 2,000 years, right?
Right.
And that was fulfilling a need that I hadn't really explored. My parents were not very religious growing up. I looked into a lot of different religions, all the major branches, the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and some lesser-known things. And then one day, about 1982, 2 witness girls knocked on my door. They were cute. I would have talked to them about anything. But they could actually answer a couple of questions I had. And so I got interested. I started studying with them, what they call studying, really an indoctrination session. And that went on for a couple of years. I really wasn't too interested in until a personal crisis happened in my life, and I was emotionally vulnerable. I didn't realize at the time how significant that was. I started spending a lot of time at their meetings, and it wasn't long before I was totally hooked, and I got baptized in the cosmically ironic year of 1984. Fans of George Orwell will appreciate the irony there.
I do.
And so I was hook, line, and sinker, a true believer for a couple of decades, got married, had a couple of kids, became what's known as an elder in the religion. For people who aren't familiar, it's similar to the hierarchical structure of the Catholic Church, only with nowhere near the amount of training.
And no pay.
And no pay, that's correct. It's all volunteer. And over the years, a lot of things happened that made me realize that this religion was not what I was looking for, was not what I was hoping. It was a high-control authoritarian group that in fact was limiting the very thing that got me interested in the first place. I'm not sure, Phil, how familiar you are with witnesses, but the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is very against higher education.
Yes, they are.
They don't want their members to pursue any kind of personal goals because you're supposed to be serving Jehovah and your brothers and sisters and putting off any personal selfish pursuits till after Armageddon. And so those musical goals and being a teacher, all those things I put off for a very long time.
Well, before we get to what happens next, we're gonna tease the audience a little bit. They're going to be in suspense. So it's kind of freaking me out here that you're basically telling me that them knocking on doors works.
Well, it works sometimes.
Yeah, well, sometimes can be enough. It's just like telemarketers. People will say, "Why do they call me?" Because I always hang up, and I go, "They get somebody. They get somebody sometime, or otherwise they'd stop."
Right.
And so you got interested from an academic perspective. Let's see what is going on. Not to mention a couple of attractive young adults, and then you had an emotional crisis, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure, and I can go into that if you want, or we can focus on whatever's more important to you.
Sure. Just real briefly, and I don't want names or details, if they're going to bother you, but right. Kind of summary. What happened? What pushed you into needing or feeling like you needed or benefited from Jehovah's Witness?
Right, and it is it's a very important question. To give a little context, I formally left the organization. It'll be 10 years this June. And in the years, especially the first couple years after I left, I spent a lot of time trying to deconstruct it. How the hell did I join a cult? And we can go through some of those things a bit at a time. But what I've since learned that people often join a group like this, whether it's a religious cult, whether it's political, psychological, business, whatever, when they are in an emotionally vulnerable state. And so what had happened at the time, I had been dating a girl, and I thought we're very serious, and we've been together a couple years, and she cheated on me. And so that was, obviously I'm not the first, and I won't be the last person to have that happen to.
Right.
But at that time, it was very, very disturbing to me. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't even realize at the time, but that's when I started spending a lot more time going to the Kingdom Hall, a lot more time associating with other witnesses, and they'd love bomb you at first, and that's what you need when you're vulnerable. And it's not really about doctrine or anything at that point. It's about belonging and feeling safe.
Yeah,
and they feel that way.
You weren't alone, and someone gave a shit about you.
To put it mildly, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a real big deal, and often, and I don't know if it's even worse now, but we have instant access to anything and everything, which means we don't need to go out, and sometimes we maybe long for some kind of contact anywhere, and if the church is offering that can fill that need, unfortunately, it comes with some side effects.
Right. Correct. I mean, some of the biggest motivational forces for all humans are hunger, sex, the need to belong, and to achieve. Right. So an organization like that, they're pretty much anti-sex unless you're married. And even then, they're got all sorts of rules about it. But they really play on the need to belong part.
Yeah. Well, since you brought it up, and people always want to hear about sex a little bit, what are some of the rules that you now consider to be wacky.
Yeah, and there are many of them. So, and they fall into some pretty broad areas. So, for instance, they're fairly puritanical in their viewpoints, as many fundamentalist groups are. So, no sex before marriage. Even masturbation is something that people are discouraged from doing. And it's a little creepy sometimes. I don't know if you've ever even been to a witness meeting, but kids aren't sequestered off in Sunday school. Everybody's together. You have the adults of all ages, and the kids are there. And with odd regularity, the subjects like this will come up. And it is strange to have small children there and talking about how masturbation is a sin. They're very anti-homosexuality. That's even considered worse than pedophilia in some ways, which is as wacky as that can be. And make no mistake, Jehovah's Witnesses have a huge problem with pedophiles in their ranks, something that they try and cover up, but it's becoming more widely known in the United States and in Europe, and there was a huge investigation into it, as well as with other groups in Australia a couple years ago. But even within the marriage arrangement, they get right in the bedroom, and the organization, the leadership has gone back and forth over things such as whether oral sex is appropriate or not. And it's just very intrusive, designed to make people feel off balance, to feel shame and guilt about their sexuality and repression about that. And let's face it, none of us would be alive if it weren't for sex.
That's right. Now, I also, over the years, I've had other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses on the show, so I do have some familiarity with it.
Sure.
What is the power dynamic between husband and wife? Because, of course, they would not welcome same-sex couples.
Jehovah's Witnesses are a very patriarchal organization. One could even say misogynistic, although there's some lip service about treating women as equals. In practice, that's not really the case. The arrangement is supposed to be where the man has the head. He's the head of the family, he has headship over his wife. She's supposed to be submissive to him. Not too surprisingly, a lot of marriages, that dynamic doesn't work too well.
Right.
So in my own marriage with my now ex-wife, it was always a source of frustration because she was a pretty strong-headed woman in many ways, which I actually wanted us to be equals. And it was just really difficult for us to try and navigate the role we were supposed to have versus the one that we kind of really wanted, also in tension with who we were as people.
Yeah, so I can see that being problematic. But you were, what's the term, elder? Is that what you were?
I was. It wasn't long after we got married. We got married when I was 27. It wasn't 2 years after that I was appointed an elder, and I served as an elder for 20 years.
And so what exactly does an elder do? Do you collect the money and count it? Do you have other responsibilities? You shovel snow out of the parking lot? What does an elder do?
Well, in Southern California, we would not be shoveling snow in the parking lot.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so there would usually be a body of elders was the term. It could be anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 men, only men, no women allowed. The elders were supposed to set the example, take the lead in the ministry, the door-to-door work, or in other forms of proselytizing, teaching positions, to some of the mundane things. And there are a lot of meetings that witnesses have. I know it's changed a bit since I've left, but when I was a member, we would have 5 meetings a week. And 2 of them were back-to-back, so you would really meet 3 times a week. And it would always be an elder who would lead that meeting. And it was touted as if it was an educational process, but it really wasn't. And that was also one of the things that always was difficult for me because I've always loved learning. I had this desire to be a teacher that I put on hold. And while many of the witness meetings kind of look like it's a schoolroom, it's not. There's a document that's read, like what the Watchtower or some other publication. Questions are asked, but there's no discussion or debate. The members of the congregation just repeat basically word for word what the materials say. So it's really an indoctrination session.
Indeed. Now, I also know, and my listeners, many of them will know, there's some issues with blood transfusions. To the best of your knowledge, is that still the case?
To the best of my knowledge, it is still the case. So,
and during the 20 years or so you were an elder, did you ever see positions change or become reversed from up on high?
Yes, several times on a lot of different things. On blood, for instance, at one time, it was the position of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society that you couldn't take any blood in any form at all. And then I don't remember the dates off the top of my head, but I'm going to say it was the middle or late 90s. They changed that to, well, you could take blood fractions. Like maybe you could take whole plasma, but not red blood cells. And that was somewhat controversial, especially for the old timers.
Yeah.
They didn't like the change. And the whole idea of blood fractions, it became somewhat of a joke. It's like, well, what about sex fractions? So, yes, it has changed, but that still is one of their sort of core tenets and a belief that is different from many other groups.
Indeed.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
As far as I know, Jehovah's Witnesses are one of the very few groups that will accept most forms of medical treatment, but refuse blood transfusions.
Yeah, it's a very interesting case, because if you have a situation where a pregnant mother is giving childbirth and starts to bleed a lot, right, and needs a blood transfusion, they would encourage her to not get one. Is that correct?
That's right. Even if it meant she and or her child would die.
That's pretty intense. And what's the rationale? Well, dare I call it that? What is the rationale behind that?
Well, a couple of scriptures that say don't eat blood.
I see. That's a pretty overgeneralization from don't eat.
Yes, don't eat blood.
Very.
So in Leviticus. So.
Yeah, because everything good comes from Leviticus.
Yeah, well, we could go there if you want to go there, like genocide, infanticide,
indeed,
slavery, all sorts of things.
And what else did you see that was a position that was modified or changed over time?
Well, different things concerning the end times. People who are familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses knows that they're an apocalyptic group. Some people would say a doomsday sect. That's not something that a witness would ever use about themselves, but it's not inaccurate. We were looking for Armageddon to come, where the good news is God's going to bring about paradise. Jehovah God's going to end all suffering, all injustice. There will be peace on earth. You'll never die. And that's the good news. But to get to that means 99.9% of the human population would be slaughtered at the Battle of Armageddon, basically because they don't believe whatever number, now it's 9 guys in Brooklyn that are the governing body. If you don't believe that those are God's appointed leaders, you're dead meat.
Oh, so is it still the 144 thing, or is it's you got to just believe in the 9 guys?
Well, those are two different things. The 144,000 comes from Revelation. That's according to witness theology, and you can't see my scare quotes around the word theology.
Right.
But according to witness theology, those are the people who are going to rule as co-rulers and kings with Jesus Christ in heaven. And it's so funny, Phil. I mean, to say that now, I feel like I'm reading from some script from some goofy sci-fi or some fantasy movie. But when you're a true believer, you're a true believer. So the hope for the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses was that they would survive Armageddon and live forever on paradise earth.
And was this paradise earth limited to the 144, or they were just the helpers and the rulers?
No, the 144,000, they were going to be in heaven as co-rulers with Christ.
Okay, so but even more people, even more good Jehovah's Witnesses get to survive and live on paradise? Is that kind of...
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know at one point I had Jehovah's Witnesses at my door, and I said, isn't it against your best interest to get people to join? Because if I join and I'm better than you, what if I'm the last one in the 144 and I bump you? And apparently they had never considered that before.
Well, most witnesses don't believe they're part of the 144,000.
Is that a newer thing, or
No. That's been the case for many, many, many decades, going back probably to the 30s. I forget now. I don't think about this a lot. I think it was 1935 when this idea of a quote-unquote great crowd of other sheep that were going to survive Armageddon and live here on Earth became a teaching. And the reason for that was, as the organization grew, there were obviously more than 144,000 people. Right? So, again, with witness theology, 144,000 is those are going to be, they're going to die. They're going to be either instantly resurrected or taken to heaven, whatever, and be co-rulers with Jesus in heaven. But the great crowd would be millions and millions, supposedly living here on Earth. And I don't know what the latest numbers is. It's probably 8 or 9 million witnesses. So, and I just as we were talking, looked that I was wrong. The exact number now of governing body members apparently is 8. It fluctuates from time to time. I said 9. Apparently it's 8. I
see that the funny thing is that if there's 9 million Jehovah's Witnesses, that means they're 3% of the population in the United States? Or is that the world? That's the world membership.
If you believe their numbers.
I don't. So
yeah,
we have that. And of course, we have seen stories, and you are saying that there are also problems with pedophilia, and you're creating a weird power dynamic where the adult has ultimate control over the life of family members and especially children, and some people end up abusing that. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's correct. And obviously all kinds of abuse, whether it's emotional, verbal, physical, sexual, this is endemic in human organizations all over the world. It's particularly egregious, I think, and heinous in religious organizations because it's obviously more hypocritical, particularly when the organizations go to great lengths to present a public image of being holier than thou and clean and better. Like many religions, Jehovah's Witnesses claim that they are the one true religion.
Yes, they do.
When I joined Witnesses in the 80s, it wasn't long before it started coming out publicly about the problem of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. And one of the things that we as witnesses would say, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this now, but it's the truth, that we would point to Catholics and say, aren't we glad we're not like them? We don't have that problem. Well, little did I know at the time that we not only were like them, we had the same problem, that in some ways it was worse because it was more hypocritical, excuse me, because as it became public, the problems over the decades with the Catholic Church, Jehovah's Witnesses continued to try and cover it up. So if your listeners or yourself were to check out what happened in Australia with the Australian Royal Commission report, it was revealed, and they looked into a lot of different organizations. Any organization, religious or secular or whatever, educational, where adults were interfacing with children or interacting with children on a regular basis, Witnesses were just one of them. But they found over something like a 60-year period in Australia alone, just using the official records of Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia, that there were over 1,000 individuals that had sexually abused children. And as probably most people know, a pedophile rarely just does it once.
Right.
So 1,000, just let that sink in. Over 1,000 individuals who had been identified as molesting or sexually abusing children over a 60-year period. Guess how many were ever reported to the authorities by the congregation or by Jehovah's Witnesses?
I'm going to go with a nice round number of 0.
And you would be correct.
Woo! Yay, team bad. Oh, that's awful. And is that still kind of the way it is today, or have they cleaned up their act and they report everybody?
I'm not involved with the organization that much anymore. I'm not officially involved. So technically I am still a member. I have maintained that just in an attempt to try and have a relationship with my two sons. And maybe we'll get to that in a bit. But I haven't been in a Kingdom Hall in 5 years, and I don't follow it that closely.
Yeah.
Sometimes some of my colleagues, former members themselves, will send me updates. There's a woman, Barbara Anderson, who was very high placed. She was actually disfellowshipped, what the term witnesses use for excommunicated, for being a whistleblower. And it apparently is still a problem. I read from time to time different court cases in the United States or in Europe. And I've seen some recent quotes that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is trying to sort of get ahead of it and do a little PR damage control, that they say things like, we abhor pedophilia, but they still have this archaic two-witness rule in place. Also from the Old Testament, that without two witnesses to establish that there's been wrongdoing, they say their hands are tied, they can't do anything. And obviously, when an adult molests a child, there's almost never another witness.
Yeah, that's strategic now. I mean, if you know how the game is judged, you just make sure that you only have one kid at a time, I guess.
Right.
That's nice. Now, since you were an elder, you were, one of the top people in your Kingdom Hall.
Right, local congregation.
Yep.
Yes.
What were these things that led you to start questioning, ended up resulting in you leaving?
Yeah, and that also is a great question. So in my particular case, it was somewhat disturbing when the elders would be getting direction from the centralized leadership in New York, the governing body, on dealing with issues of pedophilia. When I was an elder, we never had that come up in either of the two congregations I was in. If it did, I was never aware of it. But I know it happened in other congregations nearby. I would talk to some of my friends who were also elders, and to their credit, they didn't go into a lot of detail because they shouldn't have, but they shared that they were dealing with issues like this. But just some of the way people were handled. So there are a couple of different things. There were changes in doctrine that were somewhat troubling. There was this issue with pedophilia, even though I didn't deal with it directly, just knowing that, hey, I thought we were not like the Catholic Church, but apparently we have the same problems. So we're not this clean, squeaky, holy thing that I was led to believe. Their stance on education was problematic. And then my now ex-wife shared a document with me that really got me to having serious doubts. And I began investigating that, got on the internet, looked and found some different things that were incredibly troubling. And it's just like a tapestry of lies. You pull on one thread and pretty soon the whole thing comes apart.
So if I understand this correctly from our conversation,
sure,
she presented you a document that kind of was, one of the final straws that started you researching and questioning and doubting. She's still in.
She is still in.
How did this document not affect her?
You'd have to ask her. Give you her phone number.
No, I don't want to do the he said, she said, of course.
Right.
But so you eventually, out of good conscience, could not stay. And do I understand now that you are not married and you have limited access to people in your family? What's going on there?
I am remarried. So my ex, her name is Tracy. I am currently married to a woman named Cataline, so Cotty for short. She was never a witness. And just an aside, I would advise anyone who ever leaves a high-control authoritarian group, cult for short, that if and when they do start pursuing new relationships, don't do it with someone that was in your cult.
Fair enough.
I know people who have. It's hard enough to recover. You spend a hell of a way too much time thinking about it as it is. So it's been really good for me to form a relationship with someone who never dealt with this shit. As a result, she doesn't always understand it, even though she's a very compassionate person. But I get other ways to do that. I have some friends who used to be cult members, and we get together and we talk on the phone or whatever sometimes as part of the healing process. And as time goes on, less and less is that a necessary thing.
Right.
And it's a healthy part of the recovery, too.
So as you started questioning, what was the breaking point that at some point you couldn't talk to your wife? Did she say you had to get out? What happened there?
No. So a lot of things, this was gradual. You start to have doubts. It sounds like you have at least some familiarity with high control organizations.
I have some, yes.
And I've since learned that as different as one cult might superficially be from each other, the deep down, what makes them all the same is things the need to control, and they control people's behaviors, people's information, the things they think about, their emotions. And one of the manipulative things that almost all high control groups do is you can't question the leadership and you can't share your doubts with anybody else. And so you might be sitting in a group of 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people, but you're very emotionally isolated because you can't and won't express your doubts to anyone else. And so you think, at least I did, and I've since found out that many people who have left Jehovah's Witnesses and other groups that I've talked to, that you think you're the only one.
Yeah, I think that's clearly that's part of the control mechanism. If you think you're the only one, you're the one who has the problem. You need to fix it. It's something's broken or wrong with you. And that's why I think not only do they not want you to talk about it, but once you're out, and no one can talk to you. No one can be around you. No one can email you, communicate with you, share dinner with you. And Jehovah's Witnesses is one of the ones it's pretty brutal, isn't it? That once you're out, you're done.
It is, and they formally will disfellowship people for what they consider are sins, and if a person is deemed to be unrepentant. And sometimes people ask, well, what can you be disfellowshipped for? There's a long list, but the short answer is a person can be disfellowshipped or kicked out of the organization, the congregation, the community. They can be kicked out for anything that three men will agree to. Yeah,
so there's a power grab for you.
It is. And when you have a meeting with them, you're not allowed an advocate. You're not allowed to record it. The elders have a secret rule book that if you've never been an elder, you wouldn't even know what their rules of procedure are. And it's a star chamber. It really is. And they have the power and the individual does not. And that, again, is part of the whole control thing.
Sure. Now, you mentioned you have kids. Are you able to talk to them?
Well, I am able to talk to them, but they won't reciprocate. So and we've skipped over quite a lot of things, Phil. So to kind of just briefly go.
Yeah.
So in the late 90s, I started having doubts. I tried to stuff a lot in the way, and it sort of snowballed, and they were nagging. You know, everything from my need and my desire to be educated. I'm an educator, right? I've always been that, even when I wasn't pursuing that. Things like when I would read Watchtower documents, why don't they ever cite their sources when they assert things? When there were changes of doctrines of prophecy, in one way that wasn't so disturbing to me because that's not really why I joined in the first place. But we would always say, oh, we have the truth. Well, if we have the truth, how can this teaching change? Shouldn't it be eternal? And especially when it dealt with end time things. And since I've left, a really cornerstone was this idea that Jesus invisibly returned in 1914. He was gathering his people. Armageddon was going to come soon, right? So I joined in 84, and soon. It's like that line from The Princess Bride. You keep saying that word. I don't think that word means what you think it means, right?
Right.
Because here we are all these years later, soon still hasn't come. So And the pedophile thing was disturbing to me also. One of the things that really troubled me, being an elder, sometimes we would meet with people who had committed quote unquote sins. And I was very troubled that we weren't really trained to deal with them. Some people, they were very minor things. You know, maybe someone smoked a cigarette. Some were more serious. Maybe they weren't just using drugs, they were abusing drugs and struggling with them, or alcohol. Some people were suicidal. Some people were having extramarital, or they were having sexual relationships outside of marriage, which is forbidden by the group. And I could give you a lot of details, but one time we were meeting with this young woman who, God forbid, had sex. And so she felt terrible because that's what you're supposed to do if you break the rules. So she met with 3 of us elders, and the rules are you're just supposed to find out if someone did something wrong, try and determine if they're repentant. You know, how the hell do you do that? We're not mind readers.
Right.
And if they're deemed repentant, I'm almost ashamed to say this, they can be allowed to remain in the congregation. If they're not, they're kicked out. So here was this woman, a young woman in her early 20s with 3 men ages 40 to 70 pouring out her heart about this thing. And one of the older guys, he was getting off on it, and he was asking her very detailed questions about the kind of sexual activities they did. And I was the chairman of this particular committee, so I said to him, hey, knock it off. She told us she did it. We don't need to know the details. And we kind of had a little argument there. And later on, I just reflected, we really aren't trained to do this. This is highly intrusive, very humiliating. It just, even though we were following the rules, it didn't feel right.
Yeah.
And unlike Catholic priests who go to seminaries, the average Jehovah's Witness elder is highly uneducated. Not that there's anything wrong with good, honest work, but a lot of them are just blue-collar guys who maybe didn't even graduate high school. You know, they're carpenters or janitors or poolmen or electricians. Nothing wrong with any of those things. But they're not trained to deal with very difficult personal issues that people deal with. We were clearly out of our depth. I mean, in all the years I was a witness, in all the years I was an elder, I only knew 2 other men that had college degrees.
Yeah, because that's not a thing you do.
No, and if you were to go to the Pew Research Center, they do surveys on this all the time. Jehovah's Witnesses are generally the religious group that is the least educated of any religious group in the United States. And if they're not the lowest, they're down there.
Right. And so, of course, at some point, this led you to leaving. Walk us through that and how your relationship is with your kids.
So at one point, Tracy, my now ex, who was raised as a witness, she shared with me this Awake magazine from 1969, May 22nd, which said, "You'll never grow old. You'll never die. You'll never have a career." Well, okay, so 1969, that was a little while ago. That was almost 50 years ago. And I was unaware of things like this when I joined the religion. And it was very disturbing and very shocking to me. And so that created a lot of doubts. How could they write that?
Right.
So, in fact, she's going to be 60 this May. And I do wonder, Phil, that was maybe the tipping point for me.
Have you ever heard of Come Alive in 75?
Yeah, well, that too, but I didn't know about that until after I'd already joined. Right. And so I've come to believe that she did have a lot of these doubts too, but it's hard to express these even to your spouse. And this is one of the rare times I think she shared with me that this was something troubling to her. But since she had been raised in this and most of her family was in this, the personal cost of her leaving would be just too great. So in about 2002, I basically was what people now refer to as physically in, but mentally out. I decided to return to college. I started pursuing what I wanted to do. I still had teaching assignments in the congregation, but doctrines I no longer agreed with, I just wouldn't talk about them at all. And I got to tell you, I had teaching assignments almost every week in the congregation. I would go out about once every month or so and give lectures on Bible topics about once a month in congregations in the area. And it was really astounding to me, Phil. I was at first nervous, in fact, paranoid, that people would say, hey, how come you never talk about this anymore? No one ever in 7 years asked me why I didn't talk about certain doctrines anymore.
Wow. So seven years you did that.
Yeah, right. And it was a process. I still hadn't deprogrammed myself. I again thought I was the only one, and you're filled with self-doubt. My ex and I, unfortunately, we grew further and further apart, even though we lived together. We basically had a celibate marriage, and that was not a good thing. I was hoping in my mind I could find some way to get my whole family intact to leave the religion. When I came to realize that my ex was never going to leave, I started planting seeds with my sons, hoping that we could maintain a relationship, that I had this idea that if I could hang on until my youngest graduated high school, then I would just leave, and then we would have this great relationship afterwards, that their love for me would be stronger than the indoctrination. And then that was a plan, but life gets messy, and I was still a pretty messed up person. In the absence of affection and being able to express my sexual desires, I met a woman while I was still married, and I had an affair, and I'm not particularly proud of that, but that's what happened. And I decided that I needed to just end this and go, and still hoping and still believing that my relationship with my children would survive this. And unfortunately, it did not. So it's been almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years, Phil, in June, since I first quit going to the meetings. I was formally kicked out and disfellowshipped. And from that moment forward, my children stopped talking to me. My youngest son was forced to go with me to court-ordered counseling, so we had some connection for a while. But once he turned 18, that ended. And I still do what I can to reach out to them. I write letters, I send packages. I've went by my older son's house once recently. I know where my younger son does what they call cart witnessing at a local train station. I've gone a couple of times just to talk to him, and they just rebuff my efforts, and it's very painful.
Yeah, I don't know how I would handle that. I've never had anything like that, and sometimes I'm surprised, and I did it myself, how separated they can be at 18 and 20 and 23. But to have this extra layer of a thing telling them they're going to have really serious problems and lose everything that they know, everyone that they love, if they talk to you.
I even went through the humiliating and time-consuming process of getting reinstated in the religion, even though I no longer believed it, in what has been a vain and futile attempt to reconcile with my children. I thought, hey, if I could officially technically be a witness again, then they would talk to me, but it didn't work. So that took 4 years, and it was very humiliating.
Wow. Well, I am terribly sorry to hear that. We have kind of gotten to the point where we need to wrap up. Is there anything that you want to throw in to close in or tie out our conversation?
Well, if witnesses knock on your door, you can be polite or not to them, but they are a cult. Do not get involved with them, and in fact, be skeptical of any group like that. We all have a need to belong. It's important that we build healthy relationships and we recognize ones that aren't. So if anyone is dealing with something like this, and I know there are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people with this group or other groups and that are trying to heal emotionally and psychically and spiritually, you can and will get through this. It's not easy. There are support groups out there. There are therapists that can help, but you got to do the work yourself.
Yeah, there's no quick and easy way, I'm afraid.
There is not. And if you don't do the work, and I know people who left decades and never did the work, and it's like they left the Kingdom Hall yesterday, and they're still really messed up. So,
well, Daniel O'Brien, thank you for coming on and sharing, and I'm so sorry about the pain and problems that it has caused you, but I hope that someone's life will become better because you were able to share what happened to you.
I do too, and maybe one last closing thought. Even before I left, but certainly since, I made up my mind to pursue the life that I always wanted to have, to go back and for me, in education, get my teaching credential, later on to get my master's degree. And whatever life course it is for other people will obviously be different, but it's not too late to be who you always might have been and to live the life that you want and that authentic life. Lost opportunities are lost, and they are lost forever. But we have now, and we have whatever future we have. So embrace that and go after that wholeheartedly and pursue your own pathways to healing.
I love that. Ending on a high note, things can get better. So again, Daniel, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon, Phil.
A lot of people come up here and they thank Jesus for this award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. He didn't help me a bit. If it was up to him, Caesar Milan would be up here with that damn dog. So all I can say is, suck it, Jesus. This award is my God now.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
And after all that, you're still here. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the show and you value the content, we do have a page over at Patreon, patreon.com/Phil. You can donate a few bucks there. And of course, the quick reminder, anything you donate between January, February, and March will be doubled by an anonymous listener and then doubled again by me so that I'm out of pocket maximum of $5,000. And that money goes to offset travel costs, hotel costs for students going to the American Atheist Conference in late April 19, April 20, give or take, in Cincinnati, Ohio, just across the state line from the Creation Museum. So hopefully you can join us for that. By the way, American Atheist has now announced its first round of speakers, and maybe I'll have someone come on to talk about the conference again and the speakers, but you can go Google that, of course, and go to the American Atheist website to find out all the details. Hopefully I get to see you there. Until then, ciao.
Could hide neath the wings of the bluebird as she sings. The 6 o'clock alarm would never ring, but it rings and I rise, wipe the sleep out of my eyes. My shaven razor's cold and it stings. Cheer up, sleepy Jean. Oh, what can it mean to a daydream believer and a homecoming queen? You once thought of me as a white knight on his steed. Now you know how happy I can be. Oh, and our good time starts and ends without dollar one to spend. But how much, baby, do we really need? Cheer up, sleepy Jean. Oh, what can it mean to a daydream believer and a homecoming queen? Cheer up, sleepy Jean. Oh, what can it mean to a